Hello everyone, and welcome to this video where we're going to be taking a look at how the Stormworks Space DLC and pressurized gases update has affected the modular engines. We know based on the developers' last sort of talk about the bugs, there's still issues with the modular engines, and we're going to take a look exactly what that means, what we can do to fix it, to fix our creations before the developers have an official solution. So right in front of you here, we have six identical V8 engines. They exactly all have the same configuration you see in front of you here. They all have the medium generator for determining the power production. They all have a gas tank, and etc, etc. So the biggest things that I found that were causing problems in the modular engines, because they still work. You start it up right here and it's working, except if we take a look down here, our coolant manifold is not putting anything through it right now. So there's no coolant flowing through our system, meaning the engine will overheat. So that's the problem number one. And the problem number two is the gas tank has a pressure. So the pressure inside the gas tank is slowly dropping as we consume the diesel, because of course as the liquid leaves the system, there is more space for the gas to expand, therefore the pressure drops. But that may have an issue with some things as well. So I want to take a look at how we can quickly and easily fix this and see what we can do. Now this engine's running right now at 50% throttle and it's producing 85 power. So we're going to compare it with these other configurations to see exactly what it is we can do to maximize our output. Okay, so as you can see, there's pressurized air in here as it's dropping now, and the coolant is not working at all. So I'm going to stop this engine. On this one here, what I did is only one thing. I did not touch the coolant manifold, so it still does not have proper cooling, but what I did is I added a gas relief valve and a fluid port end on the gas tank. And as you can see, the pressure is now 1 atmosphere. So it's ambient pressure, it's what we're surrounded by right now. And there is some gas, some oxygen, nitrogen, and carbon dioxide. Well, not carbon dioxide, but whatever. There's some gas in here, but at the same time, there's no pressure. So this little thing relieves that pressure, and if we start up this engine, again, this one has no cooling, so it's not fully fixed. But when we get it up to power, we could see it produces the same amount of power. So that didn't really change anything, but regardless, now there's no pressure. It should be working a little more smoothly. In the next example here, I did not change the fluid tank and put a valve on it. Instead, I put a valve on the coolant. I also added a little tank, so now in this case we actually have fresh water, so I've added more coolant to our system, and we have this valve. So now with this change, we're going to see if we can get the coolant to work. So it started up, and if we take a look down here, it is actually pushing the liquid through the coolant manifold. So in this case, this works. So now our engines will properly cool themselves. So at the minimum right now, we can install something like this. I'm going to test it without adding the fluid tank, just to see if that still works. But for now, you can see we're generating the same amount of power, so it hasn't changed the power produced, but at least now we're cooling it. Turn this one off. Okay, this engine has both. It has the gas tank relief and it has the coolant relief valve. So I'm going to start this up. And as you can see now, there's no pressure in this, and presumably this is also working properly, producing the same amount of power. So that's consistent throughout. It didn't really change the power produced, but now this is a properly working engine based on what the game used to have in terms of the engines. Next, I wanted to see if I could make the system a little more compact, and rather than having the small tank, I just plugged this relief valve directly into the coolant system. And of course this one still has the gas relief valve for the fluid or the diesel tank. But if we go down here, we could see the manifold is still working in this case. So we don't need a tank, we can just do it like this. And the last test here is if we do not put the gas relief valve, instead you just put the fluid end port, you will actually end up eliminating everything you have in this tank. So in this case, our system is dry. If we start this engine up, only the gas in the system will work for a second, and then the whole thing will start to sort of stall out because there is no gas, there's no diesel in this tank. Yeah, so there you go, it's stalled out. I mean, in this case, the coolant manifold still has liquid, which is interesting. I'd say that's a glitch or a bug, but regardless, just having these fluid end ports does not work. Now, with all that discussed, I do have now the optimal solution is this setup here, where you have your gas relief valve, you have your fluid end port, and you have that on both your gas tank and on your coolant system. Now, while it is nice to do it in this big arrangement, it's definitely a little harder to do in the case of a vehicle, because usually, most times, people have already compacted these engines as much as they can. I know I sure have. So now if I have to go and add 4 blocks worth of things, because look, now we have to add both the gas relief valve as well as a port, so the fluid port. So that takes up valuable space, because not only am I putting 2 of them, I'm putting a total of 4 things inside this already compacted engine bay. So while sure I can do it on some larger vehicles, maybe semi-trucks or boats or things that have larger tanks, in this case, especially with my current coolant setup here, I could just remove some of this stuff for the sake of this video. You can see it's quite compacted already. So in this case, where would I go? I could probably put it out here and here maybe. So I could eat into some of these spaces. So that'll actually fix my coolant problem right here. If I just add a pipe like this and then make one that turns the corner here. We'll go with this simple one just so we see it. And now we need our 2 filter parts. So gas relief part, and then we need the port. So in this instance, my coolant system should be fixed. And then last step is the gas tanks. So the gas tanks I usually tend to sort of put in a sequence beneath everything. So here's one, here's another, here's a bunch of other ones, and then it kind of goes into this. So where I can try to fit something on the gas tanks might be a little harder. I might have to remove a gas tank, for example. I guess this is the gas line, but I just removed a microcontroller, so that doesn't work. I can go somewhere here on this part and in theory add something here that works. It'll look a little ugly, and I'm not going to leave it like this, don't worry, but as a suggestion, you'd have to do something like this, and then you'd have to remove certain things or certain elements. That's what I was about to say. We'll apply our filter solution, so gas relief filter, and then the port. So I think this is just too clunky in my opinion. I've just lifted the truck up on a jack stand here. If I go underneath it now, we could see that the coolant is working. And if we go to some of the gas tanks, if I can even see them through here, or maybe in here, they do have pressure buildup, which could be bad, but currently the trucks are on and it's running, so maybe in this case the pressure in the tanks is not a big problem, but here we are actually putting out some gas through this one. So this works, but it's not very pretty. It eats into some useful space of the vehicle, and I mean, I still classify that as being broken until we fix it. So what I would suggest, and I hope the developers are watching this, is what I suggest, instead of this clunky system that still has to go and be retrofitted in all your creations, I would attempt to make one of two things, or one of three things. Either any tank such as this, if you go into the workshop here and you select it, they add an option where you can have gas or liquid relief valves. So pretty much this little tank, or any tank for that matter, will have its own relief valve that you can just turn on right here. So it'll be a third option, and you say relief valve gas, and pretty much then it would be bleeding the pressure out of the valve, and you would not have to worry about, say, the gas. In this case, if we turned on a gas relief valve, gas would not build up in here. It would be purely at atmospheric pressure with our fluid in here. So that's the easiest solution, and that would fix a lot of these pre-made tanks. Obviously, the custom built tanks are another story, and in that case what I would do is almost keep it what we have, but I would try to do something where instead of having to put the filter and then this valve piece, I would just make there be a fluid end port that is a built-in gas relief fluid end port. So pretty much it's just a valve, or it's a self-manipulating valve that releases the gas and keeps it at atmospheric pressure. So instead of having to put all this stuff, you'd just put your one valve like this, and that would already be a fluid end port that regulates the gas in this system. So that's what you'd also put on your custom tanks. You just have to connect it like this with an interior fluid port, and it would relieve the pressure out of that whole system. So those are two suggestions. The intake manifold, or sorry, coolant manifold is another story, because the coolant manifold itself does not actually use, well, it doesn't have to use a tank. We could use a tank. In this case, it'll be this. And so then with the first suggestion I had is you'd literally just do this, and on this tank you'd enable a button that says, yeah, relieve the gas pressure from here, and this system would then work. But if you don't have your if you don't have a tank, instead if you just have a closed system like this, probably I'd make the radiator have that option. So this radiator, and maybe not even an option, make the radiator automatically just relieve the pressure from the system. So if you have a radiator attached, there is no gas going through it, and no gas is sort of being put into this loop where you have now a buildup of pressure. Alternatively, you could make the coolant manifold itself bleed off pressure, and that would maybe be even easier, because then the coolant manifold itself would just not allow pressure and it would work. But those are sort of the suggestions that I have to bring this back to life fairly quickly. And in the case of the last suggestion, it would not need any fixes. Instead, all the trucks and cars and modular engine vehicles would just go back to working. So thank you all for watching. I hope you learned something from this video. I hope you were informed, and as always, happy Stormworksing, everyone.